Welcome to Betrayal Narratives. Today, about to hear a story that starts with a single sentence spoken across a dinner table. A sentence that seemed harmless to the people saying it, but in reality, it snapped years of quiet endurance in one single moment. As you listen, I want you to think about the times someone you loved laughed at you as if you wouldn't tea break. Think about the line you drew when your patience finally ran out. My name is Grace Whitaker, and this is the part of my life I spent far too long just surviving. The night it all began wasn't supposed to be different from any other Sunday. I'd driven down from Seattle like always, my car humming quietly against the dim evening roads, the same playlist shuffling through songs I didn't even hear anymore. I always told myself these drives were comforting, a routine, something that kept me anchored. But the truth was simpler and far more painful. I came because I was expected to. I came because saying no felt like a betrayal. The house in Tacoma looked the same as it always did. Same porch light flickering weakly, same leaning mailbox, same curtains fluttering like tired lungs. I'd saved this house once twice, actually, but houses don't remember the hands that hold them up. And sometimes people don't either. Dinner was already in motion when I walked into the kitchen. The room smelled like rosemary and roasted chicken, but underneath it there was something else's heaviness. A tension wound so tightly it felt like the air itself might snap. My mother was chopping herbs, like the knife had offended her. My father stood by the coffee maker, staring at it as if waiting for answers. And my sister, Brooke, leaned against the refrigerator, scrolling through her phone with the ease of someone who never had anything real to worry about. She didn't even look up when I walked in. "Oh, good," she said after a moment, flicking her eyes up just long enough to register I existed. "The financial department has arrived." My mother laughed the way she always did when Brooke made jokes at my expense, quickly, nervously, like she hoped I wouldn't take it personally. My father didn't laugh, but the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth was worse. I forced a smile. That was the thing about surviving in a family like mine. You get very good at pretending the cuts stand tea sting. Dinner started off like any other surface-level conversations about the weather, some neighbor drama, Brooke's endless fashion events, and my mother's complaints about rising medical costs. Dad chimed in about a potential consulting client. I listened, nodded, and responded when required. I played my part, but halfway through the meal, the conversation shifted. Brooke raised her glass, swirling her wine like she was starring in her own reality TV show. "To clarity," she said dramatically. "Clear as daylight." Dad chuckled. Mom smiled tightly. Then she looked right at me. "Grace, where's your husband and kids?" "Oh, right, you don't have any." She said it lightly, as if it were harmless, as if it were nothing more than friendly teasing. But the words hit something raw, something I'd pushed down for years. My fork stopped midair. Mom laughed. Dad exhaled a sound that could have been a laugh, too, or simply approval. And Brooke, she smirked, in that way she always did when she felt bigger than me. All at once, the years I'd spent helping them, paying rent, saving their house from foreclosure, covering Brooke's tuition, paying for her car repairs, buying medication my mother said she'd pay back but never did, all of it flashed before me. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night. Every piece of myself I gave so they didn't have to struggle. And somehow I was the joke. Something inside me cracked cleanly and quietly. I put my spoon down with a soft click. "Brooke," I said calmly, "where's your money?" "Oh, right. I've been supporting you until today." The room froze. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. For once, no one had anything to say. That moment wasn't the peak of the story. It was the trigger, the breaking point, the beginning of everything that came after. But before I tell you what that silence unleashed, tell me, where are you listening from? And has your family ever laughed at you? Like you didn't have the right to feel hurt? 'Cause if you have, you're going to understand exactly why I did what I did next. When I left that night, I drove home without the radio on. I didn't need noise. I needed silence, the kind that clears the fog from your brain and replaces it with something sharper. By the time I reached Capitol Hill, I knew something had shifted permanently. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in a decade. I called my parents. My mother answered, her voice immediately sharp. "Grace, your sister is very upset." I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. Just said, "I need to speak to both of you." There was a pause, then my father's voice on the line. "What is it?" I took a deep breath. "I've been paying the mortgage on your house for the past 3 years. I've been covering your property taxes, your utilities, and half your medical bills. I've also been paying for Brooke's car, her insurance, and her phone." As of this morning, all of that stops. The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear my mother's ragged breathing. My father cleared his throat. "Grace, you can't be serious. We depend on you." "I know you do," I said, and my voice was steady. "And that's the problem. I'm done being your safety net." My mother started to cry. It was the sound she always used to get her way. But for the first time, it didn't affect me. "How could you do this to us, after everything we've done for you?" I almost laughed. "What exactly have you done for me? Besides, make me feel like an ATM with a pulse." Brooke got on the phone then, screaming, "You're just jealous of me. You always have been. You're ruining my life. Your life." I asked, "Brooke, you're 28 years old. It's time you started living your own life instead of the one I've been funding." I told them they had 30 days. After that, the accounts would be closed. Auto payments would stop. The bank would be notified that I was no longer responsible for the mortgage. Then I hung up. I spent the rest of the day blocking their numbers, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. The next few weeks were a storm. They called from neighbors' phones. They left voicemails filled with guilt, rage, and pleading. My aunt called to tell me I was a terrible daughter. My uncle sent an email saying I was selfish and ungrateful. It was like they had all forgotten the years I had silently shouldered their burdens. All they could see was the moment I stopped. But something amazing happened in the middle of that storm. I started to breathe again. I started sleeping through the night. The constant anxiety that had been my shadow for years began to fade. I went for walks without checking my phone every 5 seconds. I reconnected with old friends I'd been too busy to see. I realized my life had been on pause, waiting for them to not need me anymore. And now I had finally pressed play. About a month later, I got a registered letter. It was from my father. Inside wasn't a plea or an attack, but a single folded sheet of paper. It was a budget, a real one. He had itemized their income and their expenses. He wrote that they were selling the house and moving into a smaller apartment they could actually afford. He said Brooke had gotten 2 part-time jobs. He didn't apologize, not in words, but the budget was an apology in itself. It was an admission that they could have done this all along. They just didn't have to because I was there. The last line of the letter said, "We are managing." It wasn't a happy ending. It wasn't a joyful reunion. It was something more real. It was the sound of a family finally learning to stand on its own feet. And me. I was finally free. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family and for yourself is to let go, to let them fall, so they can learn how to get back up. My name is Grace Whitaker, and this is how I stopped surviving and started living. Thank you for listening. This story resonated with you? Please subscribe and share it with someone who might need to hear it too. See you next time. Inside my apartment, the first thing I did was walk straight to my desk. A stack of neglected envelopes sat there, the kind of mail you collect but never confront. I opened my laptop, pulled up my bank account, and stared at the numbers that told the story of my life far more honestly than any family photo ever. Had $84,000. That was the grand total of everything I had paid for them throughout the years. And that wasn't even counting the food, the gas, the rushed lunches on my break, or the time I'd lost. I didn't even want to calculate the emotional cost. I hovered over the recurring transfer button, the one I had set up months ago to automatically cover their mortgage. "Are you sure you want to cancel this transfer?" I clicked yes. It was one button. It's one tiny pixelated word. But it felt like snapping a chain I'd been carrying since childhood. The next morning, the messages started. Mom, sweetheart, something must have gone wrong with the automatic transfer. Can you fix it? Dad, house payment didn't go through. Call me Brooke. Hey sis, can you spot me rent? Landlord being annoying, I put my phone face down. They kept messaging, kept calling. The tone shifted from confusion to guilt to frustration to outright anger. You can't abandon us like this. You owe us. You're being dramatic. You're punishing your own family. I saved every message, every voicemail. Not out of spite, but because some part of me already knew something much bigger was coming. And I was right. On Thursday morning, I received the text that confirmed it. Come home Sunday. We need to talk. No greeting, no kindness, just an order. And suddenly, everything inside me went cold and steady. If they wanted to talk, we'd talk. But it wouldn't be the way they imagined. Sunday arrived gray and heavy, the kind of Washington sky that feels like a warning. I drove down to Tacoma without a single knot of fear in my stomach. Inside, the tension was thick enough to taste. Dad sat at the head of the table. Mom hovered by the stove. Brooke leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes rolling before I even spoke. We can't live like this, Mom said sharply. The bills are piling up. You can't just stop helping, why not? I asked quietly. Dad's voice turned cold. Don't start. Family depends on you. It's not help if it's demanded, I said. It's obligation. Brooke laughed under her breath. Wow, someone read a self-help book. My patience thinned. You mock me for being single, for not having kids, for not being enough. But you've lived off me like I'm your safety net. Brooke snapped upright. I never asked for all that. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folder I had prepared, and dropped it on the table. The pages inside fanned out like a stack of receipts for every year of my life. What's this? Dad asked. Proof, I said. Every payment I've made for this family, $84,000. And that's the conservative number. Brooke scoffed. So what? You're keeping score. No, I'm keeping evidence. Mom's face paled. Grace, stop. You're being cruel. No, I said. Cruel is what happened next. I slid a second paper across the table. This, I said, is the home equity loan taken out in my name. Dad stiffened, trying to hide the shock. That's not possible. It has your signature, I replied. The bank verified the handwriting. Mom pressed a shaking hand to her mouth. We only did it to save the house. You know your father's been struggling. You stole my identity. You weren't supposed to find out, Brooke muttered. My head snapped toward her. That makes it better, they shouted. Begged, spun excuses, tried to twist guilt into obligation, but I was done being twisted. I've hired a lawyer, I said. You have 30 days to remove my name from everything and pay back what you took. If you don't, she'll file the charges. Dad stood abruptly. You think you can threaten us? It's not a threat, I said. It's a deadline. The room went still dead, suffocating still. Brooke whispered, you wouldn't. Try me. Leaving that day felt like walking out of a burning building. It hurt, but staying would have killed me. 2 weeks later, my lawyer, Rachel, called. The investigation is done. The bank confirmed the forgery. You're cleared. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I just exhaled the breath I'd been holding for years. Academically, legally, practically, it was over. Emotionally. That came later. The Tacoma house went up for sale shortly after. Seeing the listing online was surreal. The house I once fought so hard to save was now just a picture with peeling paint and a for sale banner slapped across it. I didn't feel triumph, didn't feel vengeance. I felt exactly nothing at all. A week after the listing went live, Mom texted me, one last dinner before we leave the house. Please come. I didn't go out of guilt. I didn't go out of hope. I went because closure sometimes looks like a quiet room, a table without jokes, and a family finally forced to sit with the consequences of what they broke. The house was bare when I arrived. Empty walls, packed boxes, the kind of quiet that had weight. We ate simply, no small talk, no fake warmth, just honesty floating somewhere between us like an uninvited guest. When the plates were cleared, I finally spoke. "I'm not cutting you out of my life," I said, "but I'm done carrying the weight of yours." Mom nodded slowly. Dad said nothing. Brooke's eyes glistened, but she didn't speak either. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation. It was something in between, something like truth. When I walked out for the last time, I didn't look back. In the weeks that followed, my life shifted. Not dramatically at first, just in the soft ways that matter more. I stopped waking up with dread. I started keeping money in my savings account instead of watching it disappear. I took a promotion at work. I enrolled in a night course. I learned to cook something that wasn't cheap or rushed. I took walks in the evenings instead of reading bills with shaking hands. I learned how it felt to own my life instead of renting it out to everyone else. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that moment at the dinner table, the sting, the silence that followed. I used to think love meant swallowing pain to keep others comfortable. I used to think sacrifice automatically made me good. But real love doesn't drain you. Real family doesn't take until there's nothing left. And boundaries aren't walls, they're doors you finally learn how to close. So here's my question for you. Where are you listening from? And what line did you finally have to draw? This story hit home? Subscribe, because there's more to this world than silence, and more to strength than enduring. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the first real step toward freedom.